Thank you, Roman. Thank you, Radu, for keeping everyone awake and alert after lunch. That's no easy task. Right. I actually share part of the story with Radu because we both started in Adobe in Bucharest, and now we moved on to Basel. Anyway, a bit about myself. So I work in the same team as Dominic at Adobe in Basel. I can't remember the name. Unlike Dominic, it's very complicated. On the other hand, you know what the team does. Here they talked about it, but I'm wearing a different hat today. I'm here mostly because of my open source involvement in the Apache Software Foundation. I contribute sometimes to Felix, sometimes to Oak, mostly to Sling. I'm actually the current PMC chair right now. And yeah, I decided at what point, question. Does anyone know what the tagline for Sling is? Bringing back the fun, Bringing back the fun. And I decided for myself that I had enough fun with the development stuff and say, okay, let's figure out how fun it is to set up a Sling application from scratch, decide how to build it, how to check it, CI checks, security, etc. And it is so fun, I had to get up on stage and talk about it for 30 minutes. Great fun. So, yeah, I decided, okay, let's say I split it into more or less artificial steps. You define the application, you deploy it, then you need to take a look and see that it actually still runs, and then you need to maintain it. I would like not to maintain, but that's a wholly different task. So the OSGi feature model is probably familiar to the most of you. I'm just putting this up here so that it's clearly visible. You get a list of bundles, or you can put configurations, you can put content packages, repo init statements, you put lots of stuff in it. It's basically the default way we can assemble applications when working with Sling. So that's basically a given. Something which also for me is a given, so I had to make a choice, is that we're going to use Maven-based tooling. Don't want to get into any debates what is better. This is just what I know. And it is very familiar for me. So I just set up a Maven project and, yeah, went along with it. And here comes a question. There are two ways that you can build a Sling application. The first one is saying, OK, I take whatever Sling produces as the base. I take version 12 because I want the release, not some unstable snapshot, and then add my bundles on top of it. And that is good. It is very simple. It is 5 lines. It's pretty cool. And yeah, so it's compact. It is very low effort to try and start an upgrade. And it's mostly like moving from Java 8 to Java 9. Very simple, once you move on to the next version of the starter. But when you actually try to integrate it, and it's been a lot of work, we change dependencies, we maybe remove some stuff, your application might or might not work. This is a complicated phrase. I try to make it simpler. Lifecycle tied to upstream release. Now, Jörg had a nice idea with that poll. I should have made one. So, by show of hands, who thinks we do, talking about Sling starter releases, that we do at least 4 releases of Sling per year? Anyone? 2 releases of Sling per year? 1? 0? Okay, yeah, the secret's out in the open, right? We're not very, very good at churning out frequent starter releases, which means you get to upgrade your base platform once every 18, 24 months, which is probably not that good, when you want to consume the latest features and security fixes and all that. On top of that, you really don't know what you're getting. You're getting all of Sling. And sometimes it is hard to remove things. I mean, configurations you can remove, bundles you can remove. If you want to adjust the repo init script that comes somewhere from the Sling, good luck. Tell me how you do it. So the other option is to take whatever Sling gives you and call it platform. These are just app and platform are just conventions. Tooling doesn't care about that, right? And you say this is the Sling platform, and you put in all the JSON files that define the feature model, repo init, whatever there is. Ideally, you do this automated via Maven tooling, an archetype, and you say this is the part of Sling that I have. You can also delete some, right? If you just want segment storage, you can delete the MongoDB stuff, right? If you don't want eventing, I don't know, you can take it out. And then there's your app stuff, which is small, self-contained, but at least you know what you're getting. I mean, the pros and cons are like reversed from the previous step. These are like two opposite, but you can accept changes at your own pace as they come in, right? There's a new servlets resolver bundle, which is twice as fast as the old one. You can get it now, right? You don't wait for us to make a Sling starter release. But just because you can take individual incremental updates, it can be a lot of effort, right? Sling releases bundles quickly, and then you have to figure out how to review them, test them. So yeah, but I will have a bit more on that towards the end. What do we have now? OK, right. So pretty important, secrets management, talking about application definition. So there are many ways of doing this. One way that I found works well for myself is to define OSGi configurations and then put some placeholders in them. There is a Felix config admin plugin that at runtime, when someone tries to read your configuration, it just intercedes and replaces those secret placeholders with something coming from a secret store. And I'm going to get back to that a bit later. It's basically a file on the disk. You can do this many ways, but I think this is a very, very simple, works well with whatever Kubernetes secrets, configuration files stored on your VM. It works pretty well. Now, if you want to assemble your application, there's a pretty simple recipe. You take the Maven plugin and you tell it, these are the files I want you to include. Take everything from platform, take everything from my application, munch them together and make it work. One important note is that the tooling does not guarantee that this will actually work. So you probably want to do this thing as well. You want to scan them. If you're working with AEM, there are various analyzers which do this precise thing. You say, your OSGi imports aren't resolved. There's this requirement that isn't satisfied, and so on and so forth. So yeah, the tooling is there. It is quite helpful. That's from my point of view, that's the basic configuration. Now, that is static analysis, right? Some sort of tool takes a look at your code base, at what you have set up, and say it should work. And it's correct 90% of the time, 95% of the time, or at least it's correct in what it can check. It cannot check everything. So here I made the assumption that you're going to build a container image out of your project, and there's this Docker Maven plugin, which has a very nice feature. You tell it, OK, start this image, and wait for an HTTP endpoint to get status 200. So that's it. If you want to run some integration tests with your application later, that is fine, of course, but you only run it if these checks are passing. Does this system health look familiar to anyone by show of hands? Yes, some people. So these are the Felix health checks. It's the default servlet being invoked there. And I asked it to check for tags called startup. And then we can define a series of health checks, which more or less, when they're passing, they signal that our application is ready to work. So you can wait for the framework to restart level 20. You can wait for all the initial content to be installed. All bundles to be started, and some services. Now, usually there are more services in there, but the slide cannot be that big. One thing which threw me off was that the bundle started check uses warn for inactive bundles, and that actually made the health checks pass, but the bundles weren't starting, which led to some funny remarks on my behalf late at night. But anyway, now that I understand it, it's all good. And basically, once this is passing, you can run whatever tests you want. Now, testing shows you that your application does what you want it to do. It does not tell you about what others want your application to do and you don't want to do, or security problems. Now, recently, there have been many, many, many tools. It's the golden age of security checks and validations that are very good at basically yelling at you. You're including this version of Xerxes is ancient. Look, a CVE from 2009. How can you do that? Here, there's this one particular Maven plugin that I used, and choosing the tooling, besides what you want from the vendor, what vulnerability database they use, how configurable they are. Maybe you want to exclude some CVEs, you want to exclude some types of dependencies, and so on and so forth. Depends on what you want to ship. If you're shipping a set of jar files, then probably tooling that works at the level of Maven dependencies is the best suited, because that is basically what you are embedding. On the other hand, and that means whatever, you just have a zip archive or a deb file or an RPM file that gets shipped off. If you're shipping container images, you probably want to include something in your toolchain that actually scans container images. So one example tool is Trivi. So you give it a reference of a Docker image, and it tells you what you found. And yes, I am sorry, I have a vulnerable version of Bash. Yeah, so that happens. So it's sort of a reminder to keep your Docker library versions up to date, mostly, or the packages that you install. OK, so enough about the people who yell at us. So I have been told, and I had to go look it up and verify for myself, that it is possible to run Java applications outside of containers. And it is true, right? It sounds a bit crazy, but it is true. So for me as a Maven developer, there's a block of XML that makes it happen. So there's a nice RPM Maven plugin that allows you to attach all sort of metadata to your to an RPM, and you can say, OK, drop in the lib directory my project dependencies, and the repository, which is actually the one created by the Sling feature Maven plugin. And then you drop all the artifacts there. And you can do, of course, fancy stuff. You create directories, system users, launch scripts, etc., etc. It works. Of course, you can do something completely different, which is use a container image. And that container image, copies dependencies from one step to another, creates system users, creates directories, has scripts. What's the difference? Oh, yeah, and you ship an operating system with it, right? That's the second line, very important. You take your version of Java and whatever comes with it, and you have it's all one very cohesive package, hopefully. So this one actually echoes quite a bit what happens in the Sling starter today, but I'm still trying to figure out how to make it more reusable. One thing to point out is the longest line, the third one with the extra Java opts. I talked a bit earlier about the secrets and how the config admin plugin had a secret reference like Google/client ID. That is now the end of the file system path. The beginning of the file system path is in there under etc post by secrets, and this is where you specify it. And then it gets resolved to a full file system path by the config admin plugin, and you have your secrets. Of course, we cannot take care of your actual secrets being safe, no write permissions, etc. But that's a whole other topic. For the sake of being complete, including hacks and workarounds, here's the rest of the Docker file. But yeah, it's not that important. Of course, if we're talking about containers, we're talking about Kubernetes, and this is basically a pretty vanilla Kubernetes way of deploying things, right? So you have a namespace, you have a deployment because you want pods to start up. You have the whole seek service ingress thing, so your application can be exposed from the outside. And the persistent volume claim, because I'm one of those people who like to keep the data of their application as opposed to the other people who don't like that. So if you want to store data, you need some sort of volume, and this is the persistent volume claim. One interesting thing, so if you ever try to point Oak, IAM, Sling, whatever, to point two instances at the same segment node store, it doesn't like that. It will have bad things to say about your education. So we need to be a little bit careful about that. What that means is that the persistent volume claim that you use has read, write, I forget. Anyway, only one container can mount that volume, and it will mount it exclusively in read-write mode. So first of all, we need to ensure that there is never more than one replica. And second of all, something which bit me, again, late night, not so many nice words to say about myself who wrote that spec initially, is that when you update a Kubernetes deployment, it will, by default, keep the old pods running until the new pods are ready. But because the old pods have exclusive access to the volume, the new pods will never be able to start, which is, well, not so nice. So we need to figure this out and use the recreate strategy type, which means delete all the pods and then bring up the new ones, which means downtime, of course, but no, that's fine for me, right? Nobody uses my applications anyway. So logging, so we're into monitoring now. Logging, the story on the Sling side is actually very simple. Just log everything to standard out. That's what I prefer doing. No complicated logging patterns, shipping things to stuff. So whenever you run, like even if it's a container, if it's a systemd service, if it's a Kubernetes, the logs that go to standard out don't get lost, right? You will find them somewhere. Whether it's the systemd journal persistent storage, whether it's the kubelet logs, tools can read from there, so don't worry about just writing to system out. Actually, if you write, it's probably more effective to just spit it to system out. And there are tools like what do you want to do, Promptail, FluentD, FluentBit. There are dozens of tools that will take your log, parse it, and ship it to a system somewhere. Yeah, and once you ship it, of course, you can see that that in various systems you can have a nice UI, which is it's going to be a recurring theme of the presentation. Nice UIs are very important. So you can take a look, aggregate monitors from logs from multiple events, get yourself know a listing, what errors are there in my application, how many errors, how many exceptions, things like that. Metrics, right? Another pillar of monitoring. So there is this nice small bundle from Sling that you can deploy in your application with some dependencies, and then you get a whole bunch of 486, that's a nice number, metrics related to Sling, Oak, and JVM. Now, it's after lunch, I can talk about food. So when I first got that, I felt like I went to one of those restaurants that has this huge menu and said, what do you want to eat? And I was like, okay, what's the special of the day? I cannot, go read that many. So it can be overwhelming. So I tried to make a selection of some interesting metrics that you might want to take a look at. I excluded the JVM ones because that's for someone else to talk to. So there are metrics, and I think these are histograms about Oak query durations. So you want to see if you have queries that run over, like in the 90 percentile, take longer than 500 milliseconds, right? Those are the metrics to watch. The commit queue size, right? So Oak has a commit queue, and if you see that your commit queue keeps increasing, it means that the system cannot keep up with the rate of writes. So we need to, I don't know, you know what you need to do with the application, but at least this is a signal. Index size, it can also be a good approximation of performance. Indexes that are too large don't necessarily perform quite as well. And yeah, session count, which can be a measure of how visited your application is, but also not, I don't know, maybe client applications not maintaining Oak sessions as they should be and starting a new one from scratch, etc. Availability metrics, login errors, pretty self-explanatory. Local index directory size, they can catch some problems in case indexes aren't cleaned, or again, you have oversized indexes. Segment repository, did you remember to run compaction and things like that? So Oak is pretty good at exposing these metrics for you. Sling also has these kinds of metrics. How many jobs do you have running in your instance? Do you have 120 running at the same time, taking up CPU that can be used for serving requests? Good. How many vanity paths do you have, right? That beyond a certain number, it's documented, but I never remember. Don't have too many vanity paths, right? They can cause performance problems. How many aliases do you have in your system? Again, something to consider. Good checks about if you have a cluster, right? How many instances do you have in your cluster? Do you think you have 5, but you actually have 3, How many jobs have failed? How many unclosed resource resolvers, right? And for the rest of the menu, you can just figure it out yourself. And we do this because we want to have nice dashboards, basically. I mean, it is so cool. How is your application doing? You show someone this, or showing this. Look, it's green. It is great. That is, for me, the major reason to have metrics. For other people, the major reason is to know when something goes wrong. And if you have metrics, you can set up alerts for their values. You figure out that if your local index directory size is, I don't know, 1 gigabyte or more, then there's a problem and you need to take action. And that's when metrics also become useful because they tell you a story. You can extract context and see, OK, what happened to cause that index to be? So did I have a huge import? Do I have maybe mismatched indexes? Or my queries getting slower? So that's the follow-up from metrics. You also want to maybe take a look at requests in your system and figure out where time is spent. And I'm not sure how visible it is. That's 16 milliseconds. So I'm not sure why people say things are slow. Anyway, this is a breakdown of so first of all, this is open telemetry integration for Sling. And this is a breakdown of a page with some components, and they are nested, and you can see how much time is spent for each of them. There is some per component overhead. The first one is the full Jetty servlet execution. So you can see there is some overhead before serving the script and after. But again, if you're taking a look at performance problems and even integrating it with other traces, let's say Mongo, for instance, you can build an image of exactly what is happening from a performance point of view in your application. OK, still a bit of time. Now, let's get to the maintenance part. So I mentioned at the start of the talk that I slightly prefer the setup where you take all of Sling and you just dump it in your application. Remove some things, but keep it there because it's easy to update. Well, it's easy to update if you know about that something is released in Sling and someone does a pull request for you, and maybe you have some CI checks. So it's not that easy. Fortunately, there's a tool. Well, let's put it this way. Normally, Dependabot is the default option for many projects running on GitHub. Unfortunately, it doesn't support the feature model, and they don't plan to include new integrations. On the other hand, there's this tool called Renovate, gaining traction, which was open to accepting contributions for feature model, and there it is. I think this is from the starter, from the Sling starter example. It creates a nice PR, tells you I'm going to change from this to that. Here's you're 90 days old, apparently, to this update, and people have already done it before, and this and that. And in the end, it creates a nice commit that updates your feature model definition files. And if your CI is good enough, you can just say auto-merge if everything passes. This is actually what we do. Well, we can't auto-merge in Sling, but if it passes, I merge it. I'm confident in CI and in other people. Maybe that's not a good idea. You can, of course, also tweak it a lot. So you see there is a jumbled set of characters somewhere next to allowed versions. And Jackrabbit, like some other projects, has a policy where unstable releases are odd and stable releases are even, right? So we try to work around that by sort of creating this regular expression that says if the last character of the version is even, I think that regex is wrong anyway, but it works so far. And also we say we don't update Guava because Oak has a strong dependency on a version of Guava, but I think that's almost solved. So at some point we can replace that. And my personal favorite is if you have an OSGi bundle, never update your provided scope dependencies because you don't care. Those just generate your import bounds. OK, it's time for the demo. Let's see how this goes. So I run Linux, by the way. Let's briefly look into the RPM thing, just to show you that it actually does work. So this is a systemd service running on my machine. It launches Java. It has a bunch of things. The configuration is actually pretty simple. A systemd service is quite easy to use. I'm giving it a user It's running in the user's home, passing some environment variables, and telling it this is the script to use. And this Java applications have successful exit code 143. I asked someone who seemed more knowledgeable about it, and he looked at me and said, OK, that's 125 plus 15. I nodded, tried to look smart into his eyes, and just walked away. But that's all I know about it. This makes it work. The script is there. It's not rocket science, but it's not trivial either. But I just want to show there's no tons of trickery involved to make it launch. And finally, since I'm running on localhost anyway, this is the result of the health checks, right? So you have content-loaded bundles. The bundles are started. The framework is started. Services, more than one available. So I think right now I want to briefly show you the application so that, well, it's nothing fantastic. This one, it's a component-based application. So you're going to have an image component, description component, title components, and a comments component, which recursively includes a comment, individual comment component. The application is actually on GitHub. On my personal account, it's not an official Sling project. It's just something I like to explore. I'm bad with names. Luckily, my wife gives out the names in the family. It's called pospai, and that's a Romanian word which means thin layer of flour. And I gave it because this application is sort of a very thin and broad exploration of various topics in Apache Sling. I'm not going to. You can look at it later yourself. I'm running a bit short of time. It has GitHub Actions. Something to consider here, where is the file? One thing I had to figure out was, so for instance, the cache instance is more effective if you create a hash for the POM XML, but also for your launcher feature JSON files, because those bring in additional Maven artifacts as well. There's the trivia check. I can actually show you how that looks for my latest execution. Dun, 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 dun. So it downloads everything, and I'm not sure how much you can see this, but it's actually not that bad. We only have a vulnerable Guava dependency. These are tons of pull requests coming through from Renovate. So some of them work, some of them don't. That's fine. Not all can be automatically brought in, merged. Sometimes you need to do work. And the grouping is nice, right? It doesn't fire off individual bundle updates. It knows about monorepos and bundles that go together. So it generates one pull request which fails individually instead of 5 different failures. Briefly, so these are some nice-looking dashboards. There's the logging integration. This is all running on a Grafana cloud because I couldn't be bothered to set up my own infrastructure for that as well. So you can see errors, warn logs, how many errors or exceptions you have logged. None, obviously. And traces using open telemetry. So I just generated a very simple listing. So this is how a trace for a Java servlet looks like. I hope you can see this, but I'm going to read it in case you don't. So the top level span is coming from the Jetty instrumentation, so it intercepts it even then. And then the inner one is actually coming from the Sling integration. A more complicated one, like the one I showed in my slide, is this one. So it's, again, top level one is coming from the Jetty telemetry, and then all the other ones, I don't know how to close this, refresh. And then all the other ones are coming from Sling, right? So you can see each component, whether it's a title, the image component, the nested comments component, how long it took. Yeah, and finally, just to show you, there's the alert definition. And you can basically tell it Actually, I did this just to show you. You probably need to, you definitely need to add, okay, so that's the threshold, right? If it's above something, you need to fire an alert. Quickly, so the project is on GitHub. If you want to take a look at it, some of the work is still in progress. So the open telemetry work is an open pull request. I just need to add tests. That will hopefully happen. The work to create a expanded application from the Sling project archetype is still a pull request. I need to make it work. Renovate is there. The full feature model integration is in, and also the Prometheus bundle is has recently moved to its own repository, and there's a release coming today or tomorrow. Okay, that was it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Henry would like to know, are you also using dependency check Maven? Looks like a GitHub tool from Jeremy Long. Or is the OSS index Maven plugin friendlier for this case?
I'm using neither of those, actually. I would have to check what is going on, but for figuring out if the bundles resolve, I'm just using the feature model analyzers.
Do you intend to publish a default Sling application Grafana dashboard under HTTPS Grafana blah, 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 for a quick start?
For the quick start, no. But if there's interest in collaborating to dashboards that make sense, for Sling applications in general, I'm open to that.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.